Rude.
You're just using autism as an excuse for being rude and having a nasty tone. You mean I'm using a disability with a diagnostic criteria that includes poor social reciprocity and a symptomology that includes flat affect as an explanation for my poor social reciprocity and my flat affect? How preposterous of me.
Today I want to talk about rudeness versus just being autistic and how sometimes you can be rude and autistic.
Please don't play with me right now.
But sometimes just being autistic is perceived as rude.
I remember that a coach of mine pulled me aside once and told me that I was being rude to my teammates. And this was like the millionth time that someone told me that I was being rude when I didn't think I was being rude. I didn't understand why they were saying that.
This is Morgan Foley. She makes TikToks, and I really enjoy her content from an autistic perspective.
And I asked, what do you mean I'm being rude? And I clarified and I said, is it the words that I'm saying? Is it the tone in which I'm saying it? I remember she just kind of like stared at me for a while. And this is before I was diagnosed. She was like, oh, well, thinking about it, like, I guess you're not being rude. It's just perceived as rude. Like, you're very serious. I was like, well, yeah, I'm serious. Like, this is a team, like, we're trying to win. Like, everybody else is being serious too. I don't understand why it's just me getting told that I'm rude. And that conversation just like sticks out in my mind because it's the first time that someone was able to like give me answers as to why everybody thought I was rude, and it gave me validation of, you're right, I was not being rude, it's other people's perceptions. And I feel like that whole situation just like encompasses what the autistic experience is.
Something that stands out in this story is the fact that the coach had to confront her instead of her teammates. I understand why in this dynamic it might have been better, but also it's kind of interesting that our peer groups feel uncomfortable explaining to us in which ways we've socially faux pas. And I wonder how much better communication would be if we didn't just give ourselves as autistic people better tools, but if we gave our neurotypical friends tools as well. After all, communication is a two-way street, and we both need to learn to communicate with one another. If you're new to my channel, my name is thebertsimon. We do philosophy through pop culture, and I'm a late diagnosed autistic woman. I was diagnosed less than a year ago, and I'm still getting used to the fact that I've been autistic my whole life and didn't really know it, even though I think in the back of my head, I knew something was different in the way that I communicated. And I think I realized this because of the feedback I was getting from people. In one aspect, people really liked that I was blunt and in their face.
She's a very strong woman.
And then in some ways, people really didn't like it because they thought it was brash and rude.
When a man is blunt, rigid, and obsessed with something, it's seen as endearing. And people admire it. They celebrate the things that make him different. And I use this example a lot, but take Sheldon Cooper. He's rude, rigid, and everyone is expected to bend a little bit to make room for him. And I think that's fair. But when a woman shows those same traits, when she's blunt, like me, when she cares more about truth than smoothing every edge for someone else's comfort, it's not seen as charming. They see it as a flaw, a problem to be fixed.
Now, even though I'm not familiar with this TikToker's content, this video actually inspired a thought that I wanted to share with you. Though Sheldon Cooper is popular, I actually think he's more tolerated than anything else. I find him incredibly rude as a character, and honestly, I fell off the show mostly because of everyone's attitudes on it. I actually don't find Sheldon very endearing, but I can see why audiences like him, and I think because he comes in a male packaging, he's more tolerated. This content creator, Cyan, also mentions a female character in another show, and I'm gonna let her speak for herself, but I think she brings up a really good point about how when similar characters are also depicted in other shows but are female, the audiences respond very differently.
They see it as a flaw, a problem to be fixed. And a good example of this is Temperance Brennan. Brilliant, literal, hyper-focused on science and facts, and audiences who watch called her cold. The writers even had to soften her over time, weaving in romance, emotional lessons, and constant reminders that she could learn to be warm just to make her acceptable.
That same personality type that I have where I say things with my whole chest when I end a sentence with a period. That is the attitude that made it so my whole life, even adults came to me for advice, let alone my peers.
Dream big, because what if it comes true?
So I kind of got it into my head when I was young that the way I spoke was actually something that people wanted and liked. So I didn't really think of myself as autistic. I thought of myself as unique.
I thought I was the only one. You're like me.
Or special, or kind of quirky, or even just, you know, the woman who says it as it is, or in a pick-me sort of way, a woman who's sort of like a man.
Pick me, pick me, pick me.
Now, obviously, as I've gone older and I've deconstructed my internalized misogyny, all of the things that I've kind of incorporated into my personality thanks to being raised under patriarchy, I realized that, especially now that I'm diagnosed, all of those social situations I was in was a combination of people who appreciated and was relieved. They were definitely relieved that I was blunt, but also I did offend people and I was rude. And I want to talk about that because there have been studies that have been done that show that people actually do think or feel that people who curse or people who are blunt or say the inside thoughts out loud are considered more honest. And I think this played to my benefit growing up because I think people always saw me as like a pretty honest person. I mean, I'd like to think of myself as an honest person, but I think the reason subconsciously people thought of me that way wasn't because they had the data, but because of the way that I spoke made them think, oh, Brittany just says what's on her mind. She's not going to lie because Brittany's confident. Brittany's blunt. Brittany just does whatever she wants.
Whatever. I do what I want.
And in some ways, like I said, my attitude and personality made me reliable for people when they needed someone to defend them, when I needed to take down a bully, when they needed to hear me praise them for doing great in school or at work or slaying an outfit that day.
My mother said, you're all winners.
Like people really did rely on me as sort of a uplift my friends with my blunt attitude, because if I complimented them, I must mean it, since I would tell them if I thought maybe their outfit that day was ugly.
Nailed it.
Which brings me to sort of, when does rudeness play a role in sort of your relationship with being blunt? And I think this coincides with actually media and how we consume sort of autistic characters on TV. I grew up with the character Dr. House. People always kind of liked Dr. House because they thought he was more honest, but the truth is that he was incredibly rude and bitter. He's actually considered pretty autistic coded to some bubbles on the internet. But for me, I think what I learned as I grew out of my Dr. House phase was that being blunt didn't also have to be cruel or bitter or rude. And that whether I was autistic or not, my communication style, though I desired to be honest, wasn't always kind. And so I'm not trying to attack anyone in particular. I'm trying to learn from my own lived experience growing up. I was in high school 20 years ago. So I'm older, and I remember sitting in class and there was a girl in front of me who had her underwear sticking out. And I, trying to be a good Samaritan, reached over and said, hey, girlie, your underwear's out of your pants. And she said, yeah, that's like kind of the point. And I said, oh, my bad. I didn't realize she was trying to do the thong sticking out of jean fashion statement. I just literally thought I was helping a girl out. And I realized that I went to go help her out because my mom had told me a story years ago about a woman who she saw at a wedding going to the restroom. And when she came out of the restroom, toilet paper was stuck to her shoe and nobody at the wedding would tell her. So finally, my mom went up to her and told her, hey, you've got toilet paper on your shoe. And I just didn't want to be one of those bystanders who didn't tell somebody, hey, you've got food in your teeth. Hey, that dress, maybe that's not it today.
I just don't like it. I would not buy it.
This is actually a perfect example. Between my friends and I, if I'm wearing a piece of clothing that I really, really love, but I'm not quite sure about, I'll ask my besties, do we love it? Do we hate it? And they're supposed to answer in one of two ways. If they like it, if they would buy it, and if I would like it, and if I should buy it. This way, when they give me advice on the clothing that I'm wearing, because our styles differ so drastically, they're not only giving me their personal opinion, but they're also giving me the opinion that they think works for me as a person. This dignifies them and allows them to share their opinion and dignifies me through this process. If, let's say, I asked my friend, hey, do I look good in this clothing? And they were like, ugh, I hate that color. I would never wear that color. Ugh, when I wear that color, I just look so ugly in it. And I just think people who get that color look ugly in the clothes. Well, that would be rude. That would be so inappropriate. That'd be so unnecessary. We don't want to be cruel when we're being honest. And I think sometimes with autistic brains, we confuse honesty with cruelty because in society, going back to the study that I mentioned, we think of cursing or bluntness as something that's more honest, even though sometimes you're just being cruel. I also think you see this with edgy boys on the internet, like on Reddit posts, where they think they're just telling the truth.
That's polite for you're fat.
But you're just being rude and unnecessarily bigoted or prejudiced that you disguise as authenticity, but it's not.
No, you have unresolved issues.
I had to learn as I got older the difference between reading when somebody was doing something on purpose and it was none of my business to comment on it, and when somebody was doing something on accident and would like someone to point out, like, hey girl, your underwear's showing, your tag is out, there's food in your teeth. Learning the fine line between when to speak up and when not to speak up is also the line between rudeness or not rudeness, and it correlates with sort of learning that social script from an autistic lens.
Oh, no. I'm heartbroken.
broken.
When we think of passive aggressiveness in relation to neurotypicals versus neurodivergents, yes, neurodivergent people can be passive aggressive.
I'll never tell you when something's bothering me, but I will be extremely passive aggressive about it.
But I've noticed that a lot of the way that I show up in the world is read as passive aggressive, ironically, even though I'm also read as blunt.
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
Oh no, that's fine is code for definitely not fine.
But I'm actually just asking. So as an example, I might say to someone, oh, why did you wear that dress today? And I'm just like actually inquiring over why they wore that dress today because I'm not getting it. And they think I'm being passive aggressive and trying to say like it looks ugly or something. Like, oh, why would you ask me that? Like, why'd you wear that dress today? I'm not actually trying to judge them. I just actually don't know. There is sort of like a that's so Raven moment in my life recently where I'm like, oh, that social moment. And I said this thing and this person took it the wrong way. And now I'm like redoing all of the social moments I've had in my life that made me uncomfortable and realizing like, was I rude? Now, I really don't want to be rude. And I've realized this because I've dealt with some autistic people where they just want to state their opinions, but their opinions are kind of at the expense of somebody else's happiness. I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody shows up in a dress they really, really love. They're like, I really love this dress. It's my favorite kind. It's a halter top. I love halter tops. And then somebody who's autistic might say, oh, I don't like halter tops because they make your side boob fat look really gross. And I think that's unattractive. You might sit there and think, why did you just share that when I just told you I really like this dress? And now you're making me feel like, are you saying that's how I look? And you might say that to them like, oh, it's okay that you have an opinion, but maybe don't share it. And they'll say something like, I'm autistic. I just say it how it is. Yeah, that's not your autism. That's you being rude. It's you prioritizing your opinion over the feelings of other people when you weren't invited to make a comment about how you disliked this form of fashion.
You obviously know nothing about it.
You have to be considerate of people. And to be considerate of people, you have to be introspective. You have to show up and be appropriate and think about how it impacts you emotionally, and then extrospective, how it impacts them, and then how it helps either build or destroy the bridges between people, so our social relationships. While researching TikToks and videos and other people's opinions around rudeness and autism, I found a video of a mother of an autistic child who said that she disciplines her autistic children by whooping them into shape.
People ask me all the time how my autistic 3-year-old kid is so good and listens when you tell him no. This is an unpopular opinion, but it's because I tear his ass up.
I saw their parents agreeing with this because they felt like their autistic kids do know better and that whooping them into shape like their non-autistic kids is important.
It is always so funny when people discover that I discipline my autistic son. They're like, oh my gosh, he has autism. And I'm usually like, so? Autistic kids, autistic people are some of the smartest people on this planet, verbal and nonverbal. So they know how to take advantage of a situation if you start feeling sorry for them. They have the capabilities to follow directions. They know right from wrong. When y'all start feeling sorry for them, making excuses for them.
The dilemma with this is that autistic people don't do things for the same exact reason non-autistic people do or neurotypical people do. And so you might be disciplining people wrong, whether they're neurotypical or autistic, because you think whipping kids into shape is what makes good adults. Though it is true that rude adults were probably not raised well as children, I think if you raise your kid with a disciplinarian perspective that says, my kid is going to be well-mannered so I look good as a parent, I think you're raising your kid wrong.
All I gotta say is his name, Aaron Jacob, and he stops immediately because I tear his ass up. 3 years old, be getting his ass tore up. I tore up the first two, too. Them teenagers, best kid you'll ever meet in your life because I tore they motherfucking asses up. He ain't getting treated no different because he's autistic. He ain't gonna get treated no different. I be whooping that ass, autistic or not. Baby, don't even say mama. Don't even say mama. But he sure be getting that ass tore up.
The way this video made my stomach churn, not just because of the words you just listened to as well, and I'm protecting her identity for a reason, but when you watch this woman's face, which I hope that you don't have to, it is disturbing is the only word that I know to use. Something about her expression when she's saying, my 3-year-old doesn't even say mama, but he sure is well behaved. The emotionlessness and the detachment, the emotional detachment in her eyes, but also simultaneously the pride in her eyes telling the whole World Wide Web that she doesn't have a secure attachment with her child. There is not a single counselor, therapist, psychologist, family coach, parent coach in the world that would applaud this. Every single one of us would say, wait, your child is just surviving you. You are causing damage. This is massively dysfunctional. Please don't do this. We can help you. Can you come and learn? Because the real flex in parenting isn't having a well-behaved 3-year-old. Can you still discipline them? 100%. Do you have to cause damage or disconnection or physical pain, emotional pain of any kind? No. No, you don't. There are millions of us everywhere doing it every single day. We are not permissive. We are disciplining our children. We are enforcing boundaries, and the entire time we don't lose connection relationally with our kids.
If you're raising your kid not to be rude so they're a good community member but not a good person, I think that's wrong. I think the idea of rudeness is supposed to be deconstructed so we actually become better people, not rude people and not fake people and not, following some sort of social script that makes us deny ourselves, but just actually shows us that showing up rude in the world is almost always unnecessary. Now, I came across this Friedrich Nietzsche quote that made me kind of laugh at this idea, because his views on authenticity and bluntness and rudeness are sort of important here, because there is that psychological phenomenon where we read people that are rude as more honest, but that's not always the case. And I just want to read it for you today, and then let's talk about it. You may note that I do not care to see rudeness undervalued. It is by far the most humane form of contradiction. I'm very fascinated by this idea that rudeness or bluntness or authenticity, like they're one and the same, when they're really just not one and the same. Like, I wonder, sometimes I'll get a comment on my videos that's like, Brittany, I can't believe you didn't take into consideration this person's worldview. You're so condescending. Why didn't you think about where they're coming from first? Without taking into consideration that they also are not taking into consideration where I'm coming from. Or I'll get a comment on my stream videos that it's like, you're so judgmental, and I can't believe you're so judgmental over these people, not understanding that they are also judging me in this context. It's like everybody wants us to do emotional labor for them. They're not doing it for us. And I think you should do it when it's appropriate. And I think you should be steadfast in your opinion and hold strong your opinion without needing to be rude. In relation to my own life and how I show up in the world, I want to get better as I get older. I want to get wiser in how I show up in relation to rudeness. But I also want to make sure we're being clear. Not all of us, especially when we're in survival mode, are allowed to be compassionate without it being at the expense of maybe our own lives. I think we want to show up in the world to the best of our ability, but we also need to understand that sometimes standing up for yourself might come across rude in the face of somebody who's being misogynistic or racist or something else.
I feel like you get similar hate to me because we're like existing in the same neighborhood on TikTok. We kind of come across the same shit, but
we
from men mostly.
We're
assume.
right, and we stand on business, and
right.
Yeah, like
I don't want to be right all the time.
It's daunting.
They make it so easy.
They make it so easy, and also it's not that. I mean, it's not that hard to be this right. You know what I mean? Like, you can just read a book, open Google one time.
Like dead ass.
Now, obviously, in an ideal world, we'd all be like perfectly mature and perfectly stable and perfectly reasonable with how we reacted. But I think the difference here is calling yourself out personally for when you misstep outside of your values. Saying, okay, that's not how I wanted to show up in the world. That's not how I wanted to be perceived. That's not how I wanted to convey who I am as a person. But man, like, I really was just being a human in that moment. Human's gonna human, as we say. Something else that came to mind when I was thinking about this topic was like how old a person is or their lived experience. I was thinking about the differences between myself when I was 15 to 22, between 22 and 30, between 30 and 36. They're very different Britneys with very different tools and very different, like, how she fits into the world, basically, which means I show up differently. And so I think the difficulty here is like we're judging 22-year-olds the same way we're judging 40-year-olds, but then we're forgetting to judge 40-year-olds for being 40, because there's this idea out there in the world that, especially if you're autistic, you're so mature for your age, especially if you have a special interest in a topic that's like more adult. People will see you as a child as being like more mature when you're not.
You are so smart and gifted, so mature for your age.
I got this feedback all the time as a kid. Oh, Brittany's so strong. She's so blunt. She knows herself. She's so smart for her age. But the truth was I was still just 10. I was still just 15. I was still just 19. I didn't have the maturity or the wisdom to really be seen as a leader. I was a kid. So I do think autistic people can suffer from being sort of having like an inflated sense of ego because they think they're so mature for their age, when really you just are so different than neurotypicals. They perceive you as a leader because only leaders stand out the way you do, or they see you as a freak and then they ostracize you from society.
In its most explicit form, Aspie supremacy is the belief that autistic people, specifically lower support needs autistic people, are inherently superior in comparison to both moderate and high support needs autistics and allistic people. It was initially used as a way for Aspies to distance and separate themselves from those with higher support needs and or co-occurring having intellectual disabilities. Now, Ask Me Supremacy rhetoric has evolved quite a bit. It's gotten a lot more insidious because the fundamental purpose of it is different in many of the instances I'm seeing it utilized. And because of that, some people may not even realize that they are subscribing to supremacist beliefs, but the ideology still eventually regresses into white supremacist, exclusionary, eugenicist territory, which is particularly concerning because most people pushing these ideas are doing so with the intent of destigmatization and being progressive, empowering, and affirming. But it has the complete opposite effect for anyone who's not a low support needs autistic person, because that is the primary demographic that this mentality benefits, validates, and appeals to.
So in other words, if you're an autistic person that people like because you're blunt, you're lucky. Most people just get socially ostracized and don't end up having jobs, friends, or partners. And I think there is another layer of autistic people that I've seen who haven't fully accepted that they certainly aren't the leader, yet they tell themselves they are, but it doesn't show up in their life. I'm thinking about people that, I hate to say it this way, but kind of like live at home, don't have a full-time job, don't actually show up in leader positions, but they give themselves as being a leader because they're in their mother's basements typing away on Reddit. Regardless of their gender, I've seen it in very neurodivergent communities where people with loud opinions on the internet think they're in leadership positions, but like you're not showing up as a leader in the actual world. You're not actually leading anything. You're just the loudest person on an online forum. I think those people are much more likely to be rude in a blunt, loud way, but feel vindicated because other people on the internet are like, oh my God, you're saying the inside thoughts out loud. So when we talk about are you rude or autistic, we first have to deconstruct where the comment is coming from. Why did I say it that way? And what was I trying to convey? I know when I am trying or feeling inspired to be sort of mean on a stream. We just had the stream the other day and I was like, ooh, this person makes me want to be mean to them. But that's me. That's something I have to face in myself of, I don't want to be mean just because you're pathetic. But sometimes when I see a really misogynistic man, I just want to bully him. But is becoming a bully because of misogyny the answer? Or is it becoming kind, compassionate, and patient and knowing how to stand up for yourself without sort of bullying? And yet there is something really cathartic about bullying somebody. It makes us feel shallow but powerful, or powerful in a shallow way. And this is where the challenge comes in. When am I showing up in a way that coincides with my values? When am I being introspective? When am I being honest? And when am I just being rude? And I think it's so contextual and it is cultural, so it's subjective. But I think it's up to you and your community around you to decide, is this how we want to show up in the world? And it's really hard to answer that because showing up in the world when you're combating all these other bubbles and cultural expectations, sometimes it feels like survival. Sometimes rudeness feels like a tool to use to survive. It's a fine line. So you have to first ask yourself, am I in survival mode or am I in living mode? Because Brittany in survival mode is going to be different than Brittany in living mode. Brittany in living mode is like really privileged. She can make the choice to be extra compassionate, right? Survival mode might be the difference between me, keeping my job, losing my job, me eating today, not eating today. That's going to warrant a different reaction, right? Or you can think of a situation where maybe you're walking down the street and, somebody approaches you and it feels very threatening. Maybe in that moment you start cussing at them and yelling at them and telling them to back off. Well, that's because you're in survival mode versus somebody else approaches you and you're like, hi, how are you? And you're, loving and open and soft and like you're giving them space to be a person. These are two different opportunities based off the context of the situation. And so again, neurotypical people also have to ask themselves if they're being rude. It's just their why is different. So as a child, when I would ask why, people saw it as me challenging authority because I was being difficult, but I just genuinely didn't understand why I was doing anything I was doing, which now makes sense for my autism. But even now as an adult at 36 years old, because people see me as a leader and blunt and, all these things that make me feel like I should know what I'm talking about, when I genuinely don't understand something, people don't believe me. When I'm like, I don't get what you're saying, they're like, I don't believe you. And I'm like, okay, but like, I'm smart enough to assume what you're saying, but instead of assuming, I'm going to ask you because I genuinely don't know why for a fact. So why are you doing this? And then they'll be convinced that I'm lying because for them, they're like, there's no way you don't know. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're trying to convey. I genuinely don't know. And I know that's hard because we live in a world where people do pretend constantly that they know. But I'm really trying not to be that person. I'm really trying to say, I don't know. And I'd love to know, but I can't possibly know everything. And yet I can make a pretty good guess based off the data in front of me why something is happening. But I would really, instead of guessing, just like to know. And then at the same time, if I have to make a decision, if I have to discern, I will come to a conclusion with limited information and I will say, okay, I don't know this, but I feel like I know this enough to make a decision. So as an example, recently in relation to being rude and man children and showing up in the world as a feminist, we covered Sabrina Carpenter over on my stream channel. I'll link the video in the description. You guys can check it out, or in the pinned comment. But we talked about basically sort of Sabrina's sort of presentation and how it appeared to be sort of like mean, thoughtless in a sense, where it was like kind of unnecessarily like mean towards the men, but not in sort of a men have feelings too way, more in the, is this how I want to show up as a person way? Is this the kind of person I want to be? Is this how I want to show up in the world? But if you're in survival mode where you've been dating loser men who haven't shown up in the relationship, who are taking advantage of you, you're going to want to be mean to them. You're going to want to be mean to them. But if you're in living mode and you're privileged, like the last thing you want to do is be mean to people who are genuinely kind of failing as people.
You're wasting my time.
That's actually a big deal. She doesn't have much time left.
You do sort of fail as a person if you can't actually like contribute to a relationship or show up.
Yes, we're gonna get a dish rack and shower curtains and a cutting board. But if you think for 1 second I'm not also gonna get that marshmallow shooter so that I can shoot you in the face with marshmallows when you're asleep, then you're the dumbest woman I know.
You are not ready for love.
Or be thoughtful or be considerate. Like somehow something failed you, whether it was the system or your parents, but you basically made it to adulthood without being able to hold up your end of the bargain in any way that makes sense in your relationship, right? Whether that means cleaning the house or showing up and being kind or volunteering or paying bills or whatever that means, right?
I think I can sometimes be quite difficult because I'm quite up here, quite immature still.
Be saying something really nice and then I'll go, oh, I'm being too soppy. It's like, no, just say what you want to say. Like, if it's nice, say it. It's going to make me smile.
So I think when we think about this idea of rudeness, we really have to dissect it into different categories of survival and living. And then we have to think of it as neurotypical, neurodivergent, because my brain hops between all of the different scripts, all of the different times. And I'm just always trying to figure out like what version of me is supposed to show up in this moment. Am I in survival mode? Am I in living mode? Am I supposed to be like neurotypically rude or neurodivergently rude? Is this passive aggressive or am I actually just asking why? You know, I'm always questioning my behavior, but maybe that within itself is the autism. Maybe the fact that I'm always questioning my own behavior is a part of the autistic brain that other people aren't engaging in. And so I'm doing more emotional labor just to make sure I'm showing up correctly than anyone else is, which is within itself so autistic.
I'm late diagnosed autistic and I'm also a therapist. And throughout my life, people have told me that they thought that I was mean or rude for different reasons. And I've always been really confused by that because that's not who I feel like I am as a person. And it wasn't actually until recently that I really started to hone in on what it is that people don't like about me. And funnily enough, it's actually the same thing that makes me a really good therapist and that people love about me as a therapist. It's the fact that my brain automatically analyzes and assesses situations. And because I'm a bottom-up thinker, I have to collect every single piece of data about a situation before I can give feedback or have an opinion on it. And so I really don't really judge people. I just gather information and kind of try to support them. And that's just how my brain naturally works. And as a therapist, people love this, right? But in personal relationships, I have found that people actually find it rude. They think that I am judging them when I'm asking questions, when I'm trying to help. Even if they ask me for help, oftentimes the feedback I give them, they don't actually want it. And so I've been told a lot that, you know, people don't want me to show up as a therapist. They want me to show up as their family member or whatever, not realizing that I'm not acting like a therapist because my profession is a therapist. My profession is a therapist because my brain works that way as an autistic person. I naturally assess everything in my environment constantly.
So am I rude or autistic? It really depends on the context, but also that's the irony of being autistic is it sort of puts you down this pipeline of philosophy bubbles and self-help bubbles and trying to show up in the world as a better person bubble. But if you never actually improve, then you're not actually introspecting. You're just overthinking. And at some point, we just have to stop overthinking and show up unapologetically and just be ourselves and therefore authentic.
Oh, well, you know.
Okay. Rude, authenticity, neurodivergent, neurotypical. All of these are different categories that are so based on the context. So learn the context, deconstruct it, and show up authentic, but not at the expense of your safety or yourself. And I think one last thought before I head out, and I really want to hear your opinions down below. Do you know when you're being authentic? And are you safe in how you show up authentically in the world? Because sometimes people are authentic and their authentic self is just rude.
The sort of the left wanted to make comedy illegal, you know? Like, you can't make fun of anything. So then it was like, comedy sucks. It's like, nothing's funny. You can't make fun of anything. It's like, legalize comedy.
And at that point, maybe you should recontextualize, restructure, build a different construct over who you think you are as a person. I'm not sure that that authenticity is needed in the world, even if rude personalities tend to do really good on social media. But maybe that is a greater social conversation about how we play a role in uplifting the worst people we know into great positions of power.
So the world is laughing at us?
Because they are rude. And that somehow translates to authentic.